Join me on an inspiring journey through the world of fitness, health, and performance with the Genetic Coach, where I delve deep into the genetic foundations of athletic endurance, discovering how genetics is revolutionizing our understanding of human potential and how we can unlock our full athletic capabilities through a fresh perspective on conventional practices. Hello again, and welcome to the Genetic Coach podcast. I'm Di White, your host, and I'm excited about digging further into the science of genetics and how we can make use of genetic information to enhance our training practices and improve on the potential fitness gains we can make. In the last couple of episodes, we started uncovering the science that is showing us that genetics is the key to unlocking personal performance in physical activity. We've seen how different genetic profiles respond differently to certain types of exercise, and that some people have higher recovery needs than others, impacting how they should space their workouts and how much rest they need, both within workouts and between training periods. And then last week, we looked at how different people have certain genetic traits that predispose them to specific types of injuries, for example, muscle injuries or connective tissue injuries. I myself have been fascinated with the information I've discovered from my genetic results and how that has changed how I approach my training and the training of those athletes that I coach who have had genetic testing done. But something we have only just touched on very lightly is nutrition and what our genes can tell us about what we should be consuming. As athletes, we are very familiar with that feeling of always being hungry, eating your lunch and then 30 minutes later looking in the cupboard again for a snack. So much of our performance and the way our bodies get stronger during periods of training relies on what we eat and how we keep hydrated. But more often than not, we tend to reach out for foodstuffs that are quick and easy and convenient without putting too much thought into what they're actually doing for our bodies. We also tend to focus a lot on the macronutrients like proteins, carbs, and fats, forgetting a bit about the micronutrients and especially those that come from our fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, etc. Today, we are going to be opening up the Pandora's box of, you guessed it, nutrition. And I call it the Pandora's box because there is often so much confusion and misinformation around nutritional practices when it comes to health, longevity, wellness, fitness, and sporting performance. And as athletes, it's not only about what we're eating and drinking before, during, and after working out, but also about how we're looking after ourselves nutritionally throughout our day. And I think that's where many an athlete falls short. And it's these types of gaps then create gaps in how our body is able to respond and adapt to exercise, creating a knock-on effect that keeps on getting perpetuated. And at the end of the day results in bad habits that become hard to kick. So in this episode today, we're not going to be talking about how you should be fueling for your next marathon per se, but rather on how nutrition can support your unique genetic profile and what that means for your everyday eating practices, as well as for your habits around working out. So I've got a new guest in with me today, and I'm delighted to welcome Annelie Smith from 3x4 Genetics. I'm going to give you a little bit of her background and then jump into some questions. So Annelie heads up the clinical and mentorship team at 3x4 Genetics. She's an accomplished, certified, functionally trained clinician who has spent more than 25 years in clinical practice and the wellness industry, getting experience in many different applications of clinical and functional nutrition. This includes highly specialized nutrition interventions for critically ill patients, wellness and resilience support for executives, and enhancing sports performance for elite athletes and sports teams. She has been involved in the field of nutrigenomics for more than 15 years and has translated thousands of genetic reports into clinical practice. This has led her to being one of the most recognized international experts in the field today. And hence we are very honored to have Annelie in studio with us today. So welcome, Annelie.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Great. So let's get straight into it. And maybe you can just start off by telling us a little bit about how genetics informs our diet choices just in general.
Yeah, so let's just think about it. So what you said earlier was about that we think of food, well, often when you think about the type of diet you want to follow, you think about the fats, the proteins, the carbohydrates. But food is so much more than the macronutrients, but that's really all that we focus on. It's actually, there's so many phytochemicals, phytochemicals are these chemical structures that trigger certain processes in the body. So you can just imagine how many different processes happen. So when you eat something, there's a chemical reaction, just like any other exposure you would have, and that would then activate or deactivate certain processes. So we really want to know, what is it that we would like our food to do for us when we eat? And the best way to know what would be the effect we want. So you were saying earlier, some of the previous programs, you want to know, is it important for me to look after how my connective tissue forms, or is it important for me to reduce inflammation? What is important to me, and also what is harmful. So food, we know beyond the obvious harmful stuff in food, like the toxins and the additives, there's also other things that for instance, some people react to food like a food allergy. So there's things, but we don't always know why people react. It might be that they're not detoxing. They might be just needing something to activate certain processes. So there's all these things that it's a little bit of a black box when it comes to nutrition. And we know that there's a lot of trial and error involved. So when you look at genetics, that helps you into that black box.
Yes.
So you're going to be looking at specific processes and how genes impact it. So we first see, if we know our genes, we can see explain why our body reacts in a certain way, and then we can decide what are the nutritional plan you would like to implement to do specific things depending on your goals.
It's really, we need to start thinking about what we're putting into our bodies, because like we were saying earlier, you just reach out for the first thing when you've got a grumbling, hungry tummy, and you open your cupboard and you reach in and grab whatever's most easiest thing to come out. But we don't think about what the impact is in our body. And I guess genetics is what highlights that for us, and how these different foodstuffs are doing different things in our body. So, I mean, in previous episodes, we've spoken about our training, top 3 sort of things that we should focus on in our training and what should direct our training practices. And then we've looked at recovery and injury, and what are our top focus areas in those instances. So you're saying that by getting a genetic test done, we can look at those different categories that relate to performance and then make good decisions around our nutritional practices.
Yes, so there are lots of genetic tests out there, as we know. So I guess the main thing is, once you've got your genetics done, you also need to know what it tells you. So that's a little bit of a different subject. But the main information you are after when you do a genetic test is, first of all, very much upstream, what's going on a cellular level. Because if you have healthy cells, it doesn't matter what you try to accomplish, you're going to be at a better place. So, and the sort of basic things that we want our cells to do, and would be to repair properly. So if there's a trigger, so you go and run, you need to repair. There's all these repair systems, which is the inflammation that sets in. So how does our how well equipped is our cells to repair? So that's the inflammation part. Mm-hmm. How do we remove toxins? So toxins are not just what we're exposed to when you run in the road and you run and there's all the car fumes. There's also cigarette smoke. Yeah, so and maybe nonsense that you might be eating because you're starving. It's also the waste that builds up in our body. So just as if you have making food in the kitchen and there's waste products, there's all this waste that needs to be removed. So how well do we do that? Then we have how we also, in terms of repair, there's also something called methylation, which you might see sometimes when you read articles. And it's really just a carbon metabolism where that happens in the cell that also helps to remove toxins, but it also helps to repair damage to your DNA, and it helps to support our neurochemical balance, which is also important. We don't always think about how food can influence how we focus and concentrate. Our brain health, which is, we know there's a big movement towards stress management, mood and behavior in exercise. And then it also, we talk about oxidative stress. So that's the big thing with exercise. When you burn a lot of oxygen because you're training, you are creating these free radicals and this oxygen species, which can potentially cause cell damage. And you want to also trigger systems in the body to help support that. So that's just on a higher level. There's other things, hormone balance, connective tissue repair, vascular health, all the brain health stuff we spoke about. So there's so many things that happens systemically in the body, but it all starts at a genetic level. So when you know where you have, from a genetic test, where you have sort of genes that maybe not sort of support those processes optimally, that is really where you're going to focus. And diet will always play a role. What diet does is it switches specific systems on, and you need to know what can you do to switch those systems on, and that's really where the rubber meets the road.
For an athlete, it's not only about energy demand and meeting the energy demand of the workouts that you're doing. Obviously you have an energy output, and you've got to supply the demand with your nutrition to make sure that you're going to have the energy to do what you're wanting to do. But it's about all those supporting nutritional factors around that come into play, that makes your body work as a high functioning system to be able to perform and do your best. So maybe we can start getting into the smaller categories that you've spoken about. So you mentioned first off repair. What do we mean by repair, and what kind of foodstuffs, what nutritionally are we looking at when we talking about repair?
So in terms of repair, there's obviously quite a few things. So we have, on a cellular level, the immune system will be triggered when you do something like exercise. And the reason exercise is good for us, because it does activate these protective mechanisms in the body. So it sort of wakes it up, and that's why it's good for you. But of course, when you start off exercising, when you maybe have been taking a break, or then those systems, once they get activated, they sometimes they overreact or they underreact. So that's also where, if you know genetically I'm somebody who overreacts, or my immune system overreacts and I become very inflamed, there's things you can do to get the inflammation down. You take these anti-inflammatory nutrients. So you want to help modulate it. So I always think about repair as it's like a sprinkler system. So if you think of a sprinkler system watering the garden, you don't want to overwater, you're going to drown everything. And you don't want to cut it off by taking all these anti-inflammatories, which is always quite tempting when you're inflamed to just say, I'm going to take an anti-inflammatory. But food can do so much for you to actually help switch. So what happens is we talk about something called a transcription factor. So these are genes in our body that's like a switch that switches a whole lot of other genes on. And there are specific transcription factors that help to switch on our repair systems. So there's food that you can eat that switches these on. And an omega-3 food source, either something like oily fish or something like olive oil, or if you then do need to take a supplement, that's a very good example of a nutrient that switches systems on to help with repair. So it's not just thinking, oh, it's going to go and plug a hole somewhere. It actually informs the body that it helps the body with a signal that it switches these repair systems on.
So it kickstarts a process.
Kickstarts a process. So like you say, if you are going to just reach for something, you want your body to repair, and you reach for just a sugary drink, which is obviously quite popular post-exercise drink. I'm not saying it's wrong, but that sugar does increase inflammation. So that would not be the best thing for you to do if you are somebody who gets quite inflamed. It would be better to reach for something like beet juice, which would then help to switch on specific processes to help reduce the damage that takes place and switch on some repair systems.
So it's all about, I mean, you wouldn't know that unless you had your genetics tested, would you?
It will always be a good choice to rather have something like that. But sometimes I know you also said something about yourself personally, but I know for myself personally, I always used to think I was useless at doing any sort of long distance exercise because the fatigue would set in so quickly. And when I had my genetics done, one of my biggest issues was inflammation. So I get so inflamed, especially when I ramp up. And that when your immune system starts being activated, one of the signals your body tells you is you're tired because it's inflammation. So when I started learning on how to do things, not just when I'm training for a big event, but if I'm going to be training, well, I train all the time, that's different variations, but really focusing on having food that's going to activate my anti-inflammatory processes, my endurance levels increased because I wasn't getting so inflamed. So that was only because I did my genetics that I know that. I didn't know what was going on until I tested it.
So I think, you probably were hitting your head against the wall a bit. You kind of had this idea, something, I'm not recovering properly, but I don't really know why, and how should I be addressing that? And like you say, once you had the genetics tested, then you knew exactly, okay, this is my problem and this is how I need to address it.
Yes, exactly. I knew, I could see that I wasn't a useless athlete. I could just do things to help overcome the reasons why I was hitting my head. Exactly.
Yeah. And just something that I picked up, what you were saying is that sometimes when we soar after a workout, we kind of want to reach for that anti-inflammatory to take the pain away, but we know that that's often not a good thing because it stops the body's own inflammatory response, which is important in the repair process. But then you talk about foodstuffs that we should be including in our diet that are also anti-inflammatory. Now, isn't that the same thing as maybe taking an anti-inflammatory med? Are those foods that we're going to be incorporating into the diet not also going to hamper the body's own recovery process? Maybe you can just distinguish between the two.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So think about my sprinkler system. So the meds would be like cutting it off. So you're cutting the water off, whereas the food is more like a sprinkler system. It helps modulate. So the food, why they have anti-inflammatory properties, because they activate those systems in a subtle way that then brings along the chemicals, or this what we call cytokines, or we also talk about a resolving phase of inflammation. So inflammation ramps up and then it has to ramp down. So there's different foods, chemicals and nutrients. We're called chemicals, but these are nutrients, which really have a chemical structure that activate these processes. And we don't even always know exactly what the mechanism is, but there is a class of food called polyphenols, which it's a whole big group of plant nutrients, which has got these chemical structures in different ways, help to support the body to help itself. So, and it starts really, even the gut. So the gut can be inflamed. So you have specific foods that can help with reducing gut inflammation. You can have, like I said, food that help to calm down the whole overreaction of the immune system, and then the ones that help to resolve the inflammation. So when you take an anti-inflammatory, it just cuts the whole process off. And then the reason why it's not the worst thing always, but sometimes it helps to just minimize the damage, but it does sometimes just delay the normal process and you have a bit of a rebound going on. So food is definitely the first choice.
Just talking about polyphenols and plant-based foods, I know there's a lot of talk around going vegan nowadays and plant-based diets, but then we also know that there's a lot of good research around animal protein and how that is very important for athletes post-workout and for recovery and repair. What is your take on it?
Yes, so that's also where genetics can sometimes come in to be quite helpful, because we know there are nutrients that you cannot get in a vegan diet, specifically a vegan diet. And I'm thinking specifically of things like vitamin B12, your iron, the amount of iron you get, the amount of zinc you get, vitamin D. So these are, even vitamin A, you can get precursors of vitamin A in plant foods, but that's carotene. The retinol that's the actual vitamin A, is animal based. And those, for instance, the ones I've just mentioned are already important for connective tissue formation, plays a role in things like your thyroid health, so bone health, things like that. So if you follow a animal protein free diet, you really just need to be very careful that you get enough protein. You can definitely get good quality protein, but you have to have a mixture of different types of protein. So often people would have pea protein and hemp protein and all different kinds to complement each other. So that's important. You would definitely need to maybe do a test to see, am I more predisposed to something like a vitamin B12 deficiency? And one of the genes that come to mind is a transport protein that we can test for and see how does your body manage to transport vitamin B12 across some brain. Some people just genetically make less of those proteins and they can often have low B12, and we know how important that is in the energy metabolism, vitamin B12. When you are an athlete, you need enough iron, B12 and folate. Those are the three things that's important for your red blood cells to function, for hemoglobin. Yes, and those are often things that can be low in a plant-based diet. It's not definitely, I'm not against those. It's just it's sometimes important to make sure that you are getting those things. And what often happens then is you don't eat the food, but you take supplements, and then you need to see what is the quality of the supplements that I'm now replacing that with. So it's just, I would say it's important to find a nutritionist who can help you to make sure that you're not lacking anything. But definitely, if you do eat protein, it does have a lot of advantages. Connective tissue, repair, you need animal protein, yes, repair, and the amino acids that you get from these animal proteins are often more the essential nutrients, which can't be made in our body. So that's what we're after.
So I guess maybe that highlights, you shouldn't necessarily be following nutritional fads that are out there. Sort of get to know your genetics, get to know what's going to work for you and what your body needs, instead of, following these, like I call them fads, and not knowing whether they're actually benefiting you, like they may be benefiting somebody else.
Exactly. I think the definition of a fad is something that it sounds too good to be true, and it really is. So, and yes, you can't, one size does not fit all. Not two people would not have the same requirements. So to say everybody needs to follow this diet or that diet, and I mean, that's what happened with me in practice. People used to come to me for their diets, and I would have this idea, what is a healthy diet? And my frustration mounted until I discovered nutrigenomics and started working with genetics as well. But yes, two people can't follow the same diet. It can be the similar pattern sometimes. For instance, it was quite popular to follow a ketogenic diet for a while, and because the theory was that your body would not rely on carbohydrate, it would rely on fat, and then you would be able to have a lot of endurance. And then we know it's not true. It doesn't work for everybody. There are people who adapt easier to using fat as fuel as others, and that's very genetic. So there's a lot of examples like that where genetically people can be, maybe their blood sugar drops easier. We know caffeine, the way we metabolize caffeine and how that can delay fatigue. That is also genetic. So everybody, I mean, we know we can do through trial and error. We know what works for us. People think it's, they have a specific diet and specific secrets that they have when they have an event. They have specific things that they think, okay, I did it last time, it worked for me, I'm going to do it again.
Yes.
But it's always quite interesting why it worked for them.
Exactly. Now, you mentioned something very exciting there, caffeine. And I wasn't going to jump into it just yet, but I think now that you've mentioned it, let's get into it. We talk about ergogenic aids, and the endurance athlete is always on the lookout for anything that's going to make them faster, more efficient, stronger, more powerful. And caffeine is definitely one of those big ones that we talk about. But not everyone is suited to using caffeine as an ergogenic aid. Maybe you can just expand a bit on that.
Yes, so caffeine is also one of my I've always been obsessed myself to titrate my caffeine and play around with it and see what the dose would be, when I should take it, when should I not take it. So, but it is like you say, it's genetic. So genetically, there are a few things that influence how we respond to caffeine. So number one is how fast we metabolize it. Though there's a certain enzyme in the liver that particularly processes caffeine, and we can measure it. We can measure how fast this enzyme works, and then depending on there's different variants. So we just call it slow, medium, and fast, depending on what form you inherited. So that's the first thing, how fast you metabolize it. So if you're a slow metabolizer, the effect of the caffeine takes longer. And if you're a fast metabolizer, then of course it's quicker. And when we talk about metabolism, caffeine has a structure that goes and attaches to a receptor in the brain called the adenosine receptors. And adenosine is what makes us sleepy and makes us want to, so that's the chemical that we produce just as before the sleep. So when that caffeine chemical attaches to adenosine, it takes the space of that adenosine that would normally make us sleepy, and it keeps us alert. So that's one of the things. So how quickly that happens is obviously depends on how fast we metabolize it. The second thing is how we break it down. So the waste products in caffeine it's still a chemical. So if we use a lot of caffeine, our body still has to remove that waste, like I said earlier. So some people remove the waste faster than others. If you remove it slowly, that will also affect it's like a detox thing. So it will affect you. So that would indirectly affect your the side effects of caffeine. And then the third thing is the receptor itself, how the caffeine attached to the receptor and the effect. So you can either feel too alert that you can't sleep, or you could feel stressed depending on how that receptor works. So all those things would influence how you respond to caffeine. And then when you know your genetics, you don't have to guess so much. We can give you an idea of how much caffeine, how long it takes for it, if the effect, and how often you need to take it, depending on what you're trying to achieve.
Okay, that's so interesting. So, I mean, I know for myself, I always knew that if I had caffeine, it would make me very anxious and I wouldn't be able to sleep for a long time after having caffeine. So now, say for me, for my profile, I am a slow responder. So I take a long time to process my caffeine and I develop anxiety around that. So what would that mean to me as an athlete?
Yes, so that's very important for you to know, because we already produce quite a bit of adrenaline when there's an event. So especially with an event, that's when people maybe are more wanting to take it, because you don't always simulate that exactly on the performance day. So if you are going to be somebody who gets anxious and your adrenaline is already up, and a lot of those enzymes that break down the waste products are the same ones that would break down your stress hormone. So you also sharing in a way. So that makes it even worse, because there's the simulation is not, well, when you're training, you're not as hyped up as when you have your event on the day. So that's also something you have to take into account. But yes, if you're a slow metabolizer, it's important to know that you need to take the caffeine way before you're going to need it. So if you know you're going to, because it delays fatigue. So that's really what you want to do. It also makes you more alert, so that you can focus depending on so if you're on your bicycle, you want to see where you're going. And you probably from exercise know, okay, at this specific time in my event, I know I normally start fatiguing. So if you're a slow metabolizer, you take about an hour before, then it's going to start helping then. It doesn't help to wait till you're tired and think, oh, I'm going to have this caffeine. It's just going to make you feel anxious, and you're not going to get the ergogenic effect.
Yes. And then the opposite, if you are fast responder, if you metabolize it quickly, if you take it an hour before you need it, then it's all going to be gone by the point that you actually do need it.
Exactly, because when you're fast metabolizer, you can think it also spikes a bit more. And also depending on the dose, you can really feel terrible if you're a fast metabolizer. I think the best one to be is medium, because you have, yes, but that unfortunately you can't choose your genes.
Okay. Now, what other ergogenic supplements can our genetics inform us about, or that we can test for?
So the ones that I'm aware of would be the what we call nitric oxide saturase enzyme. So it's an enzyme that is produced specifically in our vascular system. So it's an enzyme that helps us produce nitric oxide, which is a gas, and the gas helps to dilate the arteries. That's one of the things, so that it increases the sort of circulation in a way, but it also helps with repair. So there's a lot of research to show that if you have an enzyme that works quite efficiently producing this nitric oxide, that it's an ergogenic aid in itself. So there are a few genes that's been looked at to say if people have that specific variant, that they might have a slower reduced production, and that would hamper their performance. So you can eat foods or drink beverages that helps to increase the nitric oxide production in a different method. I'm not going to go into it, but it's the same sort of thing that you get, and that's specifically beet. So beet juice, that's why that's quite popular. Your shots of beet juice, that helps produce it. Also pomegranate, sour cherry, they all contain these nutrients that help to produce it. And then there's also green leafy vegetables, specifically the more bitter tasting ones, like arugula or rocket, it's called here, celery, and watercress, those type of vegetables. I guess if you can make it in a juice form, and nobody's going to take a handful of salad on their race with them. So the shots are often the popular ones. So I know, again, talking from my own experience, I have that specific variant in that enzyme that I don't make a lot of this nitric oxide. And I have specifically also seen that as a recovery drink that it makes a big difference, because it's important for repair, it will also help to reduce oxidative stress. So it helps with both the ergogenic and the after effect. And then the third thing is creatine. So creatine has been popular for a long time. And again, from a physiological point of view, some people utilize creatine easier than others. And there's a lot of research around creatine. Creatine helps to reduce oxidative stress. It helps with repair. But it also has been shown for some people that it really does act as an ergogenic aid for power exercise, but also because it's an antioxidant, it helps with endurance exercise. Again, knowing your genetics, you could see if it's something you need to prioritize.
Yeah, interesting. I know in my case, I used to use creatine, in my cycling, and I found that it often made me retain water and put on weight. And so I decided, no, this is not for me. And then when I had my genetics tested, I saw that I don't actually need to supplement with creatine. It's not going to do much for me. So that kind of just, backed up what I was experiencing in, taking it before knowing my genetics. But I think what's highlighted here is that if you do know your genetics, there's so much information that you can start implementing right from the get-go, rather than having these experiences and trial and error, and yes, this worked for me, but that didn't, and I don't really know why, and how should I combine these different supplements, or what should I be focusing on? And that really is where genetics comes into its own in telling you right from the start, this is what your roadmap should look like, and this is where you need to go with it.
Exactly, because it's the complication with food is that it's not one thing. It's never one thing. So, like, let's take your example of your creatine. It might have been that there was something else you were also doing. I'm not saying it's true, but it might be with something else you were doing that would have been if you had a bit more of an idea of some of your genetics, for instance, that you could have done it in a different way. So sometimes things work out, and because it's not just ever one nutrient, one event, there's so much that goes into that it's a really interesting part of the puzzle, but it really helps you to get to a few shortcuts so that you can start at a certain place. You still often have to experiment, but it does help you to figure out what is a definitely yes and a definite no as a high level.
Yes, and I think that's so important what you highlight, that it's a system. Your body is a system. And so the same when it comes to your training, it's not just about the workouts that you're doing. everything else around that, your nutrition, your sleep, your recovery, your mental side, it all comes into play in terms of performance. And I think so much of nutrition as well is understanding your genetics, but then getting feedback from someone like you who's had a lot of experience and can put the system together to show you how things impact each other from different aspects, which is hugely important.
Exactly. I mean, it's like, and all those things that you mentioned that is important for training, nutrition will always play a part of it. Recovery, the way that you feel on the day, how you slept, your focus and concentration, not to mention things like gut health.
Yes, which is another big one, which is another podcast topic.
Yeah, so all those things, cramping, things that sort of happens in the day that you like, why did that happen?
Yeah.
And we can just see that we can try our best to try and get this, understand the system as well as we can and give it the right stuff.
So just quickly before we start wrapping things up, just in terms of injury, what do I mean, we've spoken about repair and recovery, but when we look at our risk for injury and how we can eat to mitigate injury risk, what kind of pointers do you have around that?
So with injury, you want to think of a few things. You want to think of the building blocks of the connective tissue in your body. So the building blocks, the things that's important to make and remodel those connective tissues. And that the first thing that comes to mind would be the correct amount of protein. But there's other things, the minerals, things like vitamin D for bone health, zinc for the matrix. So connective tissue sits in what we call the extracellular matrix, almost like a gel-like substance, and it sits in there, and there's a remodeling, or it remodels all the time. And when you have inflammation, that breakdown can be much faster. So zinc is, for instance, a nutrient that's very important for this extracellular matrix. But if you have too much zinc, then it influences your copper ratio, and copper is a nutrient that's also important for an enzyme that helps with reducing oxidative stress, which causes damage. So minerals are very important. And again, it's often good to get it from food. So your fruit and vegetables are often rich source of minerals, broths, things like that. So you need enough of that. And then the most important nutrients that stand out with connective tissue to help reduce injury is iron. So you have to have a good level of iron, but too much iron is toxic. So it's good to have it tested. Vitamin A, so I mentioned that earlier, vitamin A original is the animal source, very important for making connective tissue. Vitamin D is important for bone health. And then your anti-inflammatory, like the polyphenols that I mentioned, that helps to keep the inflammation down, because the more inflammation and oxidative stress you have, the more damage to the tissues.
What about collagen?
Yes.
So there's so much talk about that nowadays.
There's a lot of talk, and look, I've read about it quite extensively, looked at research, and there's some really good research to show that it does make a difference. Of course, the quality of the collagen, the amount that you're taking, why you're taking it, with the time that you're taking it is important. Of course, you can never out-supplement a bad diet. So remember that will always come first. But the sort of marine sources of collagen, I think it's collagen, different types, type 2, I think, if I can remember correctly. That is important to take the right amount, right type, to help boost your building blocks for collagen.
Yes. And so, I mean, can genetics tell us whether you should be taking collagen, you shouldn't be, something that you should be focusing on?
I think that there's so many different types of collagen that does different things in our body, and definitely from a genetic point of view, some people, the way that collagen is made genetically predispose them to injuries. And if they are ramping up their training, they're doing a lot of training, or obviously if you have an injury, an impact injury or something, and you want to improve your recovery time, then collagen is very useful. But knowing that you have a predisposition and that you do it as a preventative thing rather than curative afterwards is often also a good idea. But I guess if you already have the injury, it's a good idea to also see what else besides the collagen is important.
So we spoke in our last few episodes about the new app that 3x4 has been developing called GeneFit, and we've spoken about how the app incorporates your genetic data with your actual wearable training data and giving you training insights and insights into how your fitness is progressing over time. And part of that app is actually the nutritional side. So everything that we've spoken about today and lots more. And can you just talk us around how the nutrition is incorporated into GeneFit and how it's used?
Yes, so that's was a very exciting part for me to be involved in, that because we know that, again, like you say, sometimes you want to reach for something, you want to be organized, but you're sometimes so busy, life's busy, and you don't always know what are important things. So in the app, once somebody's done their genetics, we know then what needs to be supported more, what they need to focus on. So being it inflammation, injury, recovery, and then they will get nutritional suggestions of things they can do every day, and it will always speak to what we know about their genes. So it's not just randomly, we give everybody the same. So for instance, if you are somebody who's more prone to inflammation, you'll get a lot more recommendations around that. And it also depends on what you're doing. So if you're ramping up your training, then you'll get more suggestions like that, because we would know from a just intellectual, we know that when we develop the app, if somebody ramps up their training, they would need to do more. So the app is great to give you daily things that you can do from a nutrition point of view. And it also teaches you, so that you'll see a lot of things come up regularly, and then you start getting like, oh, okay, I'm sure that's something I need to remember that I must do.
I need to go to the grocery store and make sure I've got a good supply of that in my fridge or in my pantry.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's really, I mean, and these are daily tips and recommendations that you get?
Daily tips. And what's also great is that you can click on it and see why it was recommended. So it's a bit of an educational exercise as well. So if we tell you to eat berries, we'll tell you why we told you to eat berries and what it speaks to. Does it speak to your injury, or does it speak to your inflammation? So you get to do things, and you also get to learn more about yourself.
And it'll make you think twice before reaching into the cupboard and grabbing a packet of chips after your workout, or that sugary drink maybe post-workout or pre-workout. So I think definitely the educational aspect is a huge part, and just creating new habits, I guess.
Yes, and you'll see the beauty of it is that when you do it consistently and just follow it, you will really get such amazing results that it will, it's not just because sometimes we try things, but we don't try it for long enough, or we don't have the exact same recipe. So you will see if you do it consistently and you follow it, it will really make a huge difference for you.
And that is the same in training. Consistency is key. Okay. Well, Annelie, thank you so much for all you've spoken about with us today. It's been super informative, and I think there's so much more to talk around and to dig into. So we're definitely going to invite you back to join us again, and just sort of dig into the different parts of recovery and injury and supporting our energy systems for good performance. But for now, that's all that we've got time for. And we thank you, our audience, for listening in today. And we look forward to chatting to you next week. Bye for now.